It's time to tune in to Defending the Faith with Frank Harber. Hear the latest about religious liberty.
A win for religious freedom in one of the remaining blockbuster cases facing the U.S. Supreme Court this term.
A legal battle continues for the Little Sisters of the Poor for nearly a decade now.
A street preacher armed with a speaker, a microphone, and a camera strapped to his chest is now banned from the village.
Our founding fathers believed in the separation of church and state, but not for one fleeting moment did they believe in the separation of God and government.
And powerful apologetics. Are you prepared to defend the faith?
I'm convinced unless we trust in God, this nation is finished.
We're facing a new kind of enemy. We're involved in a new kind of warfare, and we need the help of the Spirit of God.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another episode of Defending the Faith. I am Frank Harber. I am your host. I am the President and Chief Legal Counsel for Defending the Faith Alliance, and I am a religious attorney. Our alliance defends the faith. We defend Christ. We defend churches. We defend Christians all across the country and help them maintain their ability to speak truth to the world. One of the big things that we do is that we help churches. And so we have a new thing called Church Shield that you might want to tell your church or pastor about, where we cover the 8 core documents of the church, things like articles of incorporation, bylaws, making sure that the proper language is in there so that your church can have religious freedom and religious autonomy, so that you don't have to compromise on your church's beliefs concerning things like marriage and weddings and other things that you would do at your church. It's very, very important. And so we cover all the documents and make sure that a church is provided for. Also, one of the things we do is we also provide free wills for people in these churches and give them the opportunity to leave a bequest to their church if they so incline. But the wills are free to any of our Alliance church members. If you're not a member of one of our Alliance churches and you want a free will, you can still get one with us, and you can join our Shield program. And we have several Shield members, and we would love for you to be a part of it and help us protect religious freedom across the country. You can find out more about that at defendingthefaith.law. So right now we're going to join our program in progress, and we pray that you will be blessed by what you hear next. Well, God bless you, and welcome to Defending the Faith. I am Frank Harber. I'm the President and Chief Legal Counsel of Defending the Faith Alliance, and we defend the faith. We defend the 3 C's. We defend Christ, we defend churches, and we defend Christians. And so we have legal cases across the country helping protect religious liberty, helping protect Christian rights. And, you know, our big thing that we're doing now is we're helping churches with our Church Shield program, which is absolutely incredible. It helps churches protect their religious documents. It's a church document program where we help them with their bylaws. We help them with their articles of incorporation, their 8 core documents, their code of conduct, their facilities usage policies. I mean, we're living in a different day where you have to have very clear policies on your church policies, because if you don't have something in your bylaws in your state will automatically revert to your state's nonprofit bylaws. And that can be a scary thing for churches. So it's very important to put certain things in your bylaws that are important, particularly statements on marriage. We even put a lot of things now in church documents concerning pronouns, because this is something that's exploding across the country. We're going to be talking to our guest in just a moment. He's going to have some things to say about this, but we took John Stampers with us. John, we took a pronoun case just yesterday, and this one is in the military. We also have them, where we're representing people that are working in businesses. We got one particular case where we've had someone who's worked in a business for 10 years in a corporation. They have them, where you live, and they have them where you're going to in Chicago. And, they've been told that they will have to, that they're being forced and compelled to use false pronouns in their workplace, something they didn't have to do before, but now they're being told that they have to do this. And for a Christian, that's problematic because, Christians, we know if you follow the Bible, if you read the Bible, that lying is a sin. And so, it's actually a really big deal because it's in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. And I might add, you shouldn't bear false witness against your neighbor, even if they want you to bear witness against them. So just because, you join in somebody else's lie doesn't mean it's okay. And so we don't want to bear false witness. So, what we do is we help people who are in that situation get a religious exemption. So if you're watching this and you're in that kind of a bind, you're in that kind of a pickle, call us and we will help you. We will help you pro bono. Well, we are so glad to have John Stamper here. Oh, let me say this too. With our Church Shield program, we have something new. Yeah, John, I have ADD, man. I will just change the subject on myself. So, but we got something new, John. So like when people sign up for our Church Shield, they can get free wills for their church, and they can get free living wills in their church. 2 out of 3 people don't have a will. And so, but the latest thing, and we just added it this week, and I'm so excited about it, is a revocable living trust. And we have those available for church members to do if your church is in our alliance, and it's really cheap. It's just $100 a month for a church. That means everybody in the church can get a free will, a living will, powers of attorney, advanced medical directives, and a revocable living trust for free. And we also take care of your church documents. So, if you are interested in that, tell your pastor about this. We're at defendingthefaith.law, and you can find out more information about us. Now back to our show. We have John Stamper here today, and he's written a book called Conflicted: Pulling Back the Curtain on Public Education. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this book is a page turner. This book is absolutely fascinating. I know some of you are going, well, that's, kind of a boring subject, schools and different things. Oh, no, it's not. I mean, you just won't even believe the drama that's happening in public education. And John has written a book, and, he's got a fascinating story about how he grew up and his parents were in Donahue. And so we're going to have to hear that story, John, today. So, but anyway, welcome to the show. Tell us about you. Tell us where you are. I know you're going to be moving. So give us the lowdown on your family and who you are.
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is John Stamper. I am living in Chicago, Illinois right now with my wife. My wife's name is Jenna. She's an attorney here in Chicago, but as Frank mentioned, we are going to be moving to the suburbs shortly. I'm a career teacher. I taught for 13 years, mostly in public schools, a couple years in private schools. I coached as well for 13 years. The last few years since I've decided to leave public education, I've been developing homeschool curriculum. And as Frank mentioned, I wrote this book recently.
This is an excellent book. As we get into this, tell us what led you to write this book. This book is fascinating. This book is, I love it, the way you laid it out, the way you wrote it. I don't think there's really another book out there like this, but, and if you're listening, and we'll talk about it at the end, especially if you're a pastor, you need to get this book, and it's with Master Books, and we'll tell you all about that at the end. But John, what led you to write this book?
Well, in the 2020-21 school year, which was the beginning of COVID, that first school year with COVID, I taught for Chicago Public Schools, my one and only year. And in that fall, we had to complete teacher training, which is normal. We do that every year, a couple times a year. But this particular teacher training was all about using preferred pronouns, which you've touched on, intersectionality, school practices and policies that undermine parents. So as a Christian, these were things that violated my convictions, and they were things I could not do, which was kind of the title of the book, Conflicted. I was conflicted on how to handle this. Up to this point, I had only kind of heard about these things in schools. I had never experienced it. So when I was faced with it, admittedly, I was a little unprepared. I didn't quite know what to do. So there's a lot of examples in the Bible maybe I want to stand up and fight like David versus Goliath, or maybe I want to flee the city before destruction like Abraham and Lot. So I was conflicted on what to do, and I needed to hear from the Lord. But eventually I did decide to leave, and I started making homeschool curriculum with Masterbooks. And the president of that company, Randy Pratt, he's the one who suggested I write about this topic in my experience, because there are many teachers and parents and families kind of wondering what to do, or a little either uneducated or uneasy or scared about what's happening in school. So I just wanted to sound an alarm on, what I've seen, what I've experienced, and just provide information for teachers and parents to help them make decisions moving forward.
That's excellent. So you were talking about, some of the issues like critical race theory. Now, there's people who are saying in the media that there is nowhere that's being taught or pushed in public schools. Is that true?
It's not true. And I'll give you just a little bit of an example. So one of the training modules that I experienced was titled intersectionality. The concept of intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is one of the most well-known authors on the topic of critical race theory. So in this training module, intersectionality, every teacher in Chicago Public Schools was trained on the concept of intersecting identities. This is where you have privileged identities versus marginalized identities. So some of these privileged identities, and I'm going to look at the graphic right here that was used in my training, and I'll read it word for word. So some of the privileged identities are Christians, white people, men, heterosexuals. And not only that, but where two identities meet, there is an assigned tactic of abuse. So I'll give you another example. A Christian who speaks English is guilty of using non-Christians, or Christians are guilty of emotional abuse. Men are guilty of emotional abuse and intimidating and threatening. And heterosexuals are guilty of using children. So there's all kinds of accusations that are just assigned to people based on their religion, based on the color of their skin, and their sex. So these are some of the things that, I could not adhere to, but that my employer was compelling me to do. So this is where the conflict set in.
Well, what's concerning is, I could fathom that being taught as a theory in college or something, but when you're teaching it to little kids, that sounds more like indoctrination than education to me.
Absolutely. And down the road, in effect, what it does is it turns classmates into enemies. It turns colleagues into enemies because they either look at each other as privileged or marginalized, right? Oppressed versus the oppressor, right? So we have this division. It's a division of, society as a whole. And it even goes into the family level. So it's very divisive. And like you said, it's a theory, but it's being taught as truth. Now, I have no problem learning about any theory, but there's a time and a place. So when we're pushing these things on the little kids and it's taught as truth, this is really setting us up for disaster later on.
Yeah, that's why it confuses me that we would start teaching critical race theory at that young age, because when you start looking at the roots of critical theory and then critical race theory, this has some ties into socialism, and it's not a pretty history, really. Right. I'm not sure why we would want to teach this to kids.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's Marxism, one of the hallmarks of Marxism is a disruption of systems and disruption of institutions. So when we start dividing society, these are Marxist tactics, right? That's where oppressor versus oppressed comes from. So, and Marxism is an atheist ideology. So these are not just small things that should be, brushed off our shoulder or just moved on from. These are serious ideas, serious ideologies that are being pushed K-12.
Yeah, it's like people are trying to create a revolution or something like that by trying to stir up dissension and division. And for example, critical race theory, as I've studied it, and we've done a couple shows here on it, I just don't see where it solves anything. I don't see where it's a solution. In fact, as you look at it, it seems to be creating a whole new set of problems that actually weren't there before it existed. And so I just don't really understand the rationale for such an early age, trying to push this so hard.
I agree with you. And I mean, from my perspective and my experience, teachers, most teachers and educators, they care for kids. They want to be nice. They want to do the right thing. So they go along with these policies. But where I think that we as a whole, where we fail, is we don't remember or we don't understand the historical significance of these things, of these ideologies. These things have happened before. And that's, I think, the most important chapter in my book is chapter 8, where I talk about the rise of communism during the 20th century and how education systems contributed to the rise of communism in the 20th century. Not only that, we can draw parallels to our own education system here in America. And that is, to me, really when the alarm bells start ringing, because we're starting to see, whoa, this was done before. How did it turn out then? We can use history like a roadmap, and we can see the stops along the way that we've taken, and we can learn from that, and we should learn from that. And that's really what I'm trying to do by talking with you here today and writing this book.
I appreciate it. It's a lot of things that we take for granted in this country are so important, and we have to take notice of these things that are happening, because if we don't speak out, then they'll probably get implemented and be upon us, and then we will lose the things that make us a great nation and a great country. And so it concerns me, because a lot of people are teaching, hey, there's a better way, there's a better path out there, there's better countries. But where's the example? Where is it where this happened and we can go, hey, look at history. They implemented this here and they're so much better off. I don't know of that existing. Do you know of any?
No, I don't. Some of the examples that I gave you, we talk about the USSR under Lenin, Nazi Germany under Hitler, Communist China under Mao, Communist Cambodia under Pol Pot, and then, the current North Korean regime. So we can look at these historical governments, countries that implemented very similar, if not the same ideologies that we're implementing today. And we can see that, it led to, how many people being murdered, millions and millions of people being murdered in the 20th century due to, communism. And so it's a dangerous path, and it ought to cause us to want to change direction immediately.
Absolutely. Now, there's other things that are going on in the schools that are really, really strange. And one is, and you talk about it in your book, gender theory. Now, this is interesting because it's something that we work with churches, with parents, all kinds of stuff, because this, as early as kindergarten, this stuff is being introduced, which, introduces this idea of gender identity versus biological sex. What are your thoughts on that being introduced at such an early age?
Well, just based on my experience and what my teacher training had, for kindergartners specifically, teachers were given the gender unicorn, which you may know about. It's a little cartoon character. It looks like Barney, but it's meant to introduce 5 and 6 year olds to gender theory, where they can be attracted to men, women, or other genders. They can be men, women, or other genders. So already at the age of 5, we're pushing this confusion on these children, not only confusing them, but sexualizing them. And then that only gets worse and worse as they get older and older. Another example of, the gender theory in my training was teachers were always supposed to affirm students, right? Affirm them if they were transgender. We were always supposed to use preferred pronouns. But here's the thing. Our school policy was that we were not to notify parents. We were given an example of an 8th grade student in Chicago public schools who was out as trans in school, but not out at home to their parents. So school staff knew about it, teachers knew about it, peers knew about it, but the parents did not know about it. And that was policy because teachers needed to protect the privacy and safety of the student, which is based on the assumption that parents are dangerous. But you know what? That makes sense because the graphic that I told you about, the intersecting identities graphic, it says that adults use children, right? So that's the basis of how they function. They assume that adults use children. So when we create these privacy safety policies because parents are not safe, it's all in line with their ideologies. So it only reinforces itself, as we go on in the public schools. Sorry if that was confusing.
Wow. No, that was good. And
Yeah.
My latest case involves someone that's in the medical field, in the military, and this stuff coming up. But then also in the midst of this, they have to report medical information, which has to do with not sexual orientation, but biological organs and things. You have these things or you don't. And I mean, it's interesting because you're like checking a box that, this is a girl, but it's actually, they have the physiology and the chromosomes of a man. And this would be important to know if you're treating somebody medically. And, as I listen to this person talk about the mental gymnastics of going on some of this stuff, it actually blows my mind. And I'm not sure a kid could appreciate this, that, kids love pretend. Kids love Halloween. They love to dress up and make believe and everything else. And so, when you say, hey, here's this other thing, and you can pretend to be something you're not, you could see where that would appeal to little kids who love to use their imagination and stuff like that. I think this whole thing becomes very unsafe when you start saying, well, let's take the pretend to a new level and let's get them some drugs that will help lock this in where they can't back out of this. Let's, do this medical procedure. And, John, you're probably aware that, that there's millions and millions of dollars at stake on the line as far as the treating, because you're wondering, well, why aren't more doctors speaking out? Why aren't more hospitals speaking out? It's because of the sheer amount of money that's involved. That's absolutely crazy. And, and then I think you mentioned it. What's a big deal on this is parental rights. If your child is going through this, the school, who may think they have more power than the parent over what's happening than the child, which to me, that's a whole issue in and of itself. Who has the rights? Is it parental rights, or do school rights trump parental rights, so forth and so on? If something is happening with somebody's child like that, they might need to notify the parents, so the parents could at least know what's going on and help them, or whatever needs. I mean, they're their parents. So I'm concerned about schools from a legal perspective, not telling parents what's actually happening at the schools. I think that's actually a violation of the parents' rights. You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. You're right on the money. You may know about it, but in case there are teachers or parents out there that don't know about it, you can read about it in the news. But some schools and school districts actually have parental secrecy policies. Parental secrecy policies. And what those are, say, for example, say a middle schooler goes to their school counselor, it's a biological boy, and they say that they identify as a girl. They want to use female pronouns. They even want to change their biological name to a female name, but they don't want their parents to know about it. Then the school counselor can mark that the student requested not to tell parents, and they won't tell the parents out of safety and privacy for that student, right? So here we have parents kept in the dark, parents and children divided, right? Undermining of parents, which is, a Marxist tactic that's been done before. So parental secrecy policies, that's one thing to keep your eye out for. Another are special school programs. special weeks, special months, right? It's June 1st. You know what June is? Pride Month, right? Schools are celebrating. Chicago Public Schools had a huge celebration where students could sign up to be LGBTQ allies. There's no parental permission slips going home for this. Students can walk down the hall, sign their name, and get a bracelet, and they wear it around school, you know? So all of these special weeks, these special events, these are great ways that students can be indoctrinated, that these ideologies can be snuck in, you know, behind the curtain, behind closed doors, and parents are kept out of it, really. They're unaware, you know, which is part of the problem. Not to their fault, really, but, you know, it's an intentional deception.
Oh, I agree. I think there's legal ramifications, and I think probably the only way it's going to stop some of this is for some of this to play out in court.
Yeah, I agree.
And go to the top. So let's go back in time. Let's get in a time machine here. And your parents appeared on Donahue.
Yeah.
So tell us what happened. This is a good story.
Right. So I'll give you the whole story. So,
and our listeners may not know who Donahue was. He was a TV show that was kind of had gossipy things and all kinds of stuff on it. But
Bill Donahue
was a big deal back in the day.
Oh yeah, big deal. So in 1991, my parents moved us out from the Chicago suburbs to rural Indiana. And I have 3 older siblings. They were all enrolled in the local public schools at that time. I was too young at that point. I was only 4 or 5. And in our local public school system, the Gideons had a tradition where once a year they would stop by every 5th grade classroom and offer their little Bible to any 5th grader who wanted it. And other groups had the same privilege, you know, 4-H, things like that, Girl Scouts, whatever. And there was a parent in the school system that did not want the Gideons passing out Bibles, and they actually sued the school corporation. But the district court ruled in favor of the school corporation, to their credit, saying that the Gideons were allowed to do this. But then the decision went on to the state Supreme Court, Indiana State Supreme Court, and they reversed the decision, which meant that the Gideons could no longer pass out Bibles in public schools. So my parents at this point were new Christians, maybe 4 or 5 years, new Christians, 4 little kids. And they were worried about, you know, what are our kids going to learn in school? They wanted to start us off, you know, on a biblical foundation with a biblical worldview. So they made the decision to homeschool us. At that time, my mom decided to write a letter to the editor of our small town newspaper, the Rensselaer Republican. A couple thousand people might read it. And her article was titled, "The Absence of the Bible Leads to Moral Decay." And she talked about...
I like your mom.
She's awesome. She's the best. Yeah. So she just kind of talked about society's, you know, ailments, divorce rate skyrocketing, suicide rate, depression, violence, and how they're all correlated to the absence of the Bible. So a couple weeks passed, and we're all at home, and the telephone rings, and my mom answers. It was actually the Maury Povich show. Maury Povich invited her and my dad on to their show, and she was like, "Why me? Why me?" They had read my mom's article in the Associated Press out of New York City. Somehow, her little letter to the editor got published in the Associated Press. A few minutes later, the Phil Donahue show called, inviting my mom and dad to fly out to New York City, come onto their show to debate Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who was the president and founder of the American Atheist, maybe the most prominent atheist in America. So my parents decided to take them up on the offer, flew out to New York City, and appear on the show against Madalyn Murray O'Hair. And I remember when they were backstage, my dad told me the story of before they went on to the set, he had to go down the hallway to use the restroom. And as he was walking down the hallway, Miss O'Hair stepped into the hallway at the same time. And they hadn't met yet. They didn't know each other. But Miss O'Hair turned to my dad and said, "You're from Indiana, aren't you?" And he was kind of startled and said, "Yeah, yes, ma'am." And she goes, "Those Gideons are slime." She told him she knew about the story of the Gideons. So she was prepared. And my dad was kind of shocked that she even knew him. But so the show starts taping, and my parents are seated front row, surrounded by atheist supporters of Miss O'Hair. And she's talking about, you know, how Christians don't like her because she's an atheist, and Christians haven't done much for society anyway. And the show was nearing the end, and Mr. Donahue approached my parents and introduced my parents. And if you're familiar with the show, people can call in live and ask questions. Audience members got to hold the microphone and stand up and ask a question. So my parents stood up front row, and he didn't give the microphone to my parents. Mr. Donahue held it himself. But even though it was my mom's letter that sparked this whole thing, my dad was the one who spoke when the time came. And I always looked at that as kind of how a husband and wife complement each other. They have different talents and abilities, but they're in harmony. So I always thought that as a really cool thing. But my dad, he spoke out very boldly and strongly, and I can send you the video, Frank, if you want. But he said, Miss O'Hare, you said that Christians hate you, but I'm a Christian and I don't hate you. In fact, I love you, and Jesus Christ loves you. And he basically just went on to give her a mini gospel sermon to her and the whole country. So, he got to speak for about 1 minute, and he talked about how separation of church and state is not in our founding documents, but it is in the founding documents of the USSR. And he brought in a little bit of history and a little bit of context, and he said that during the commercial break, Miss O'Hare was yelling at him and cussing at him because he had mentioned on air how her own son, former atheist, was now saved and was a preacher, and she took offense to that. So, but you can imagine just regular parents. My dad's an iron worker. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. They're both barely 30 years old, on national television, surrounded by atheists. So they were definitely intimidated. You can imagine, put yourself in that situation. But it just goes to show that when you're obedient to the Lord, when you trust the Lord, and you follow his leading and his guiding, that that's really what matters. And what I take away from the whole situation is that my parents stood on their biblical values. That's why I was homeschooled. I was homeschooled because the Bible in my family was prioritized. It was to reign supreme on our life. Okay. So fast forward 30 years, and here I am in Chicago public schools, and I'm faced with a spiritual situation, a conflict of conscience, and I don't know what to do. So I had my parents' example to stand on. They took a stand for God's word, and God provided for them. God protected them and blessed them. And I look back on my homeschooling life and experience, and I love it. And I'm so appreciative of the experience that I had. I emphasize enough just how important parents are, which when I see schools undermining parents, I don't like that. I take offense to that. That's a major problem. You're robbing children. You're robbing families of their future. And we need to draw the line. At some point, we got to stand up and say, this is not right. And, hopefully my story resonates with some people out there and can somehow help teachers and help families, make decisions about this topic.
I think it will. Well, before we close, and I ask you where we can find this book and find information about you, any closing thoughts, summing up, any solutions? What you've got the floor. Give us some closing thoughts here on this subject. Give us some hope, maybe too.
Right, I appreciate that. Well, the hope is there is an alternative, right? Like my parents provided my siblings and me with an alternative, and the alternative is the Word of God. So I don't know what God has for you. I don't even know if you're a Christian out there, but if you're not a Christian, if you are a Christian, God has a plan for you, and your plan might be different from my plan, etc. So if you are in public schools, whether you're a teacher or a family in public schools, I just encourage you to seek God on direction. Seek him for wisdom, seek his guidance, seek him for courage and boldness, because it's a scary time out there. You might be the only one in your school or the only one in your family, your community, to stand up against these things. So, and I don't know whether he wants you to stay or wants you to leave. That's not my decision, but I just encourage you, seek the Lord and follow his leading and guiding, because as for my parents, I believe, were faithful, and I'm reaping all the benefits, right? I am blessed because of what my parents did. So just know that when you're obedient to the Lord, when you're obedient to his leading and guiding, you'll be blessed and your family will be blessed. Aside from that, I just hope my book just provides information, helpful information to teachers and parents, so that they can make, career choices or education decisions for their family. And, you can find that book on Amazon. You can also find it on masterbooks.com. And you can also listen to my weekly podcast. It's called The State of State Schools, where I just give a weekly recap on what's happening in education, from my perspective, from a Christian perspective.
John, where can we subscribe to that? I want to subscribe to that podcast. Where would we find you?
You can find my podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Okay. Well, you've been listening to John Stamper, and this has been an incredible show. And I'm going to tell you that he's only scratched the surface of what is in his book, Conflicted, Pulling Back the Curtain on Public Education. It's a page turner. I promise you, every single page. I mean, it's just great stuff. It's plutonium. It's eye-opening. Every parent should read this. Every educator should read this. You should buy a copy and give it to your pastor. Pastors, you all need to read this book. Well, God bless you, and we pray that you would share this episode with several people. Share it with your good friends. Share it with your church members. This is a message that needs to be heard. We need more people out there like John Stamper, and I'm so glad, John, that you have joined us in the show, and I know that God is going to bless you in this new book that you have out. So please get a copy of that book, share this episode, and we will see you in the next episode of Defending the Faith.
Thank you.
Well, God bless you, and thank you for tuning in to this wonderful episode of Defending the Faith. If you want to find out more about us, go to www.defendingthefaith.law. And there you can find resources about why Christianity is true, how to know God exists. You can find out about our SHIELD program and join us and become a partner with us. And one of the things that happens out of that is you could get a free will and leave a legacy. And, so many people, they don't have wills. And so it's one of the things that we do make available to our SHIELD members, to our church SHIELD members, and also to our SHIELD members who are partners with us in our ministry. We pray that you've been blessed, and we will see you in the next episode of Defending the Faith.